been, well done, Nick, thank you. What to say today? I guess in a way it's natural to kind of do a bit of a conclusion, a kind of winding up, a kind of gathering together all the various things that we've done today, and maybe the what we've been learning over the nature of mind talks. And I woke up about 4 o'clock this morning just thinking about what to say. I tend to leave things to the last moment. Just seems to work better for me. Coming up, when I'm sort of confronted with people, I usually think of something to say, and I like to be more spontaneous. Anyway, what I was thinking of during the early hours of today was that I don't know if we've really sort of thought about the nature of mind. We've been looking at the nature of mind from different ways, different angles, different aspects. It seems to have many facets, and this will continue over the course of the next few months. We'll be looking at the nature of mind in different ways, different experts giving their opinions on mind, non-Buddhists as well as Buddhists, and it all seems as though the nature of mind is very, very complex and complicated. And yesterday I mentioned a story about the Buddha's teachings, which when you first come into contact with the Buddhist approach to mind, and that's basically what Buddhism is mainly about, really, is working with the mind. It can seem to be rather complex and complicated. And so I retold the story that the message is that the Buddhist teaching is quite simple, that the message is of a very advanced practitioner in ancient China who said that the Buddhist teaching was to cease to do evil and to do good and purify the mind. And it's quite interesting. And yesterday I talked a bit, perhaps more about the ceasing to do evil and learn to do good. And I probably need to say a bit more about that today. But the purifying the mind is quite an interesting idea, because it's probably pointing to the fact that you have to work with your mind. And what you begin to realize, or maybe you're beginning to realize, or you've already realized many years ago, that sometimes it feels as though you haven't just got one mind, as though you've got more than one mind. You've got a kind of a mind that can be aware of your mind, another part of your mind doing something, can't you? You can be aware that you're thinking something, for instance. And we've been practicing this in the meditations. Of course, we've been watching our breathing, being aware that we can stay with that feeling of the breath coming and going. We can be aware of that. And then suddenly we become aware that we've stopped doing that and we're thinking about something, and we know what we're thinking about. And we can be aware, not everyone is, by the way, but I suspect all of us here are able to do it. We can be aware of what we're feeling, in terms of our emotional tone, whether we're feeling happy or sad or irritable or depressed or buoyant, etc., etc. We can actually be aware of those things as though there's a sort of slight distance between the actual experience of that and the awareness, the mind part that's actually being able to observe us experiencing that. So it's all kind of slightly complex. And to make things even more complex, there in the Buddhist tradition, there's also the tradition of with some of the highly advanced practitioners who kind of insist, or their insight is to seeing that mind essentially is pure. That if you can strip away all the habitual complexities that we bring into our lives and bring the mind back to what one teacher calls his famous Padmaloka calls naked awareness, the mind is just pure in its natural state, in its nature. Unfortunately, that may be simple and it may be true that the mind is pure, but our minds aren't pure because, probably why we're here, we have minds that are constantly making more and more complexity to the essential nature of mind. So you could say that the nature of mind in its kind of natural state, if you like, is pure, is just just as it is, and it's not a thing. It's an ability, a way of being that's constantly flowing, and that's been the kind of background theme this week, is that everything is flowing, everything is changing, and we're always trying to fix things and hold on to things, and that causes difficulties for us, sort of creates a world in which we have difficulties, and it's good to remember that it is the mind, and this certainly is what the Buddha says, and it's certainly what Penny Sartori realized, Ian McGilchrist realized, I think, and is that the mind comes first. It comes before anything. So it's as though we're actually creating our own reality, which is very difficult to believe, isn't it? Because we look around and there's just reality, and we can't really take on board that we're creating it. Maybe we don't need to, actually, because it's too complex to even contemplate. But what we can take on board is the way we respond to this reality that we live in, that we may be co-creating, is we do have some degree of control over, is the way we respond to situations, to experiences that we're having, how we respond, we do have some control over. When we have an experience, by the way, there's sort of two parts to it in a sense. There's the part that is like the pure experience, like you suddenly realize you're irritable, you're tight, you're kind of, usually my face goes like this when I'm irritable, so you're kind of irritable. If I had a mirror in front of me all the time, I'd know when I was irritable by just kind of frowning. I do, although sometimes it's I'm thinking, so I'm not quite sure, but you can tell how you're feeling. But how you then, that's a kind of resultant, if you like, of what has happened before. Some conditions have come together that have produced within you, within me, irritability. And that's a kind of, is what is called vipaka in Buddhism. It's like a fruit or the resultant of a number of conditions that we've been conditioning ourselves and the way we've been responding to reality, that makes something happen within us that is too far. It just natural, it just happens, and it just comes into being. And it's good to feel kind of neutral towards that. Like it's not a bad, if you suddenly feel really angry and a lot of ill will, it's not helpful to sort of get all guilty about it. It's just like the resultant of things that have happened before. That's the first thing that happens, but then almost immediately you produce activity around it. In Buddhism, it's called karma. It's usually got an ethical basis, and you're either, this experience you've got, you're either taking hold of it and making it more real, or you don't like it and you're pushing it away, which equally makes it more real. And it all happens so fast that you don't really, you just think it's one experience. And then after that, you interpret it, you think about it, and you explain it to yourself. I'm irritable because of some various reasons. And what you can try to do with the practice of working with mind is create this space between recognizing something's happening and how you're responding. And then you work out the more useful way of responding to each situation. Ideally, every situation that you have, every moment in life, you become aware because you've created this kind of little bit of space of how you're going to respond. And if you can respond in a way that's helpful, that's more life-affirming, that's more generous, kind, and so on, you will then be setting up the conditions for, as it were, new moments of experience. These moments don't really exist, you just have experience, but that's how we experience things. So again, it's quite a simple process, isn't it? All you have to do is kind of create this space. It's actually, the technical term is called awareness or mindfulness. Is you make this space, this gap between something happening and the next thing you're going to do about it, whether it's to think it through, or someone shouts at you, or you almost react immediately by shouting back or thinking, or you go into fear. Partly this all happens because of the brain. It's kind of in our hard wiring. If we see danger approaching, if we're going to cross the road and we see a car whizzing towards us, we'll step back. We don't need to think about it, and we don't actually want to create a gap at that point because we might be too slow in reacting. So it's normal, and it's wonderful that we have this ability to respond to certain situations immediately. But when it comes to our inner sort of life, it's sort of more important then to be working on creating more of a gap so that we don't do foolish things, or when I say foolish things, unhelpful things that create more difficulties for us. Sometimes when you become more experienced at this whole thing, the gap doesn't need to be very big. To start with, you might need to make a longer gap. So let's take the experience of receiving an email today. You turn your emails on, and there's an email, and you don't like what someone's saying to you in this email. I'm sure you've all had one of those emails, or you get a bill through the door, or through the electronic mail, and you immediately respond to it. You're already hitting the reply button, and you're typing, and you're thinking about what to say. And in that situation, it might be good to just say, when I'm dealing with those things, I'm going to make a break. I'm going to just stop, look at something else, or reply to, if it's a personal thing with people maybe do it tomorrow or later in the day or something when you've created a gap. But other things where you suddenly feel like, oh, wouldn't it be nice to send someone an email, or ring someone up today, or go and do something, buy some flowers for someone, or send someone a card or something like that. It's quite good to not make too big a gap, because you'll start thinking about it and all the complexities. If I'm going to send a card, I've got to stamp an envelope, got to go to the post office. If they're abroad, you probably have to go to the post office, or you have to go walk down the street, and it all gets very complex and complicated, and you think, oh, I can't be bothered. Anyway, I've got to do the other jobs, and you don't do it. So sometimes simple things where you feel you have an expression of gratitude, for instance, you can do it quickly. It's good to learn to do that. So you train yourself basically in learning how to respond quickly to what we could say more positive, more helpful, more skillful ways of behavior, mental states, and to hold back a bit on the ones that are sort of unskillful and unhelpful. So basically, the message is we've got a pure mind that in its uninfluenced state is pure and is natural, and it's sort of our essential nature. However, we seem to have accumulated around it, or I don't know how it's happened, no one knows, but the reality is that the mind, and Buddhism has some strong words to use for this, it says the mind is poisoned. It has 3 poisons within it. It's poisoned by sensuous craving, and that's craving of all sorts that satisfies all our different senses. It has a poison of ill will, of not liking something and even hating something. And it has the poison of delusion, thinking things are definitely this way, that the world, as I see it, is definitely like this, and you're right, and everyone else is wrong, or everyone else agrees with me. And we kind of are poisoning our minds all the time. It's just an ongoing process because everything's in flow. It's quite a strong term to use, actually, and it may not make you feel very good. And if you're not already feeling very good about yourself, being told your mind is poisoned isn't going to be very helpful. So it's probably better to think of it in terms of, rather than being poisoned, that you've got these habits of blocking yourself from allowing something more wonderful, something more beautiful to emerge. So it's a bit like, you're just got slightly poisoned, but you're not a bad person. You're definitely not a bad person because you've got a mind that functions like that. You're a good person, and you're a good person because you're recognizing that, you've got these habits of like, I don't like these things and I don't want them, and go away. I don't like these sort of people. Oh, I love these things, come closer, I want more and more of it. And it's all kind of confusing. And my tendency is to try to simplify things, and sometimes I oversimplify things. But what I've realized, we're living in a more and more complex world, and it's kind of more difficult in some ways to just be aware of what's going on. And maybe people have been living in complexity for forever, because the Buddha said, if you wanted to train your mind more, one of the most important things to do is to live a simple life. So what you find in Buddhism is lots of people go off, and they used to go off and live in simple places like caves or shacks, not work very much, just take all the complexity out of life so they could just focus on their mind. And which works really well if you're able to focus on your mind. Today, though, is life is very, very complex. But maybe it's the same message that we could be giving ourselves, is to be looking for simplicity. And I think one of the dangers of when one uses this talk about simplicity, finding simplicity in order to work on your mind, it often seems to bring with it an idea that you have to live a kind of, well, for me, I immediately start thinking of poverty. It's like life is becoming a bit empty. You simplify things by taking out the complexity, and what you're left with is emptiness. And I don't find that attractive at all, actually. I actually would want to live a rich, fulfilling life. So I guess the trick is, at least this is maybe a rationalization on my part, but the trick is to live a simple life that is full of richness. So there are lots of things in life, lots of sensual experiences you can have, which don't cost anything, that are free, and actually in their basic nature, they're quite healthy. So, like, for instance, going out and enjoying walking in the park, in the countryside, in what you call nature, sitting in the sunshine if it's sunny, if it's not too hot. I know some people live in places where you don't want to sit in the sunshine, but where you can look at the colours of the world around you. There's so many different colours. Even in a forest, there's so many different shades of green. There's so many things that are simple that our senses can enjoy that are very, very healthy and very helpful. Vidya Mala was telling me about a workshop she was doing yesterday about food, about diet, and it seems as though if you can have a very simple a diet of food that's basically basic food, plant-based, basic non-processed foods, you'll be healthier. And I think if one could apply the same principle to life, that if we can live a life that is essentially simple, not too complex, and looking for ways of removing the complexities that we just manufacture, and we can look for enjoyment and pleasures that are quite healthy and quite helpful to understanding mind more and more. And I think it's useful to recognize that there is something, I would imagine, or I can't say I know, but I'd imagine we're all here in this group because we're interested in mind, and we're interested in mind because there's something in our mind calling us to be interested in mind. It's as though we have an aspect of our being that wants to understand, that wants to remove the suffering that we might be bringing into our life. And to just recognize this, that this urge is there, this desire is there. And if we don't do something about it, we just forget about it, it will keep kind of coming back and bothering us. It's a bit like if you start becoming aware, it's very difficult to turn awareness off. If you start becoming more and more mindful, it's very difficult to stop being mindful. No matter how much you distract yourself, you know you're distracting yourself. So you become aware. I'm just distracting myself from being aware, and actually it's a form of awareness. So we've all kind of got this longing, which is a really good thing. It's a longing to become something more, something better, and not to give into it. But then it requires us working with it and then removing the complexities so that we can have more spaciousness to understand the principles of what we're going on in our mind, the nature of mind, and then doing things that are supportive to creating a more simple life, creating a less reactive, automatic reactive way of being, a more kind of considered, a more creative, responsive way of being, responsive to all the things that we can be responsive to and we need to be responsive to. And that way our life, it has this cyclical ability. Instead of just going round and round like on a revolution where I just come back to the same thing again and again, and I'm just fed up with it. You need to realize you will come back to the same thing, but you'll be better equipped to deal with it. So it's a bit like life does go round as a revolution, but it can also go round as a kind of spiral or as a helix, where you kind of rise, go round. Oh, here comes that mood again. But you think, oh yeah, I know what to do now. And you kind of risen above that. Sometimes you kind of, it's a bit like snakes and ladders. You kind of feel like you're going up and you slip down again. But at least you know you slipped down, which is actually, in the scheme of things, that means that you're actually higher than you started. So you're in this constant process of going upwards, or going deeper, if you want to turn it upside down, and looking for more meaning and more clarity in the depths of being rather than in the spaciousness of the sky. So you can choose your own metaphor for this, whatever suits you best. So the message is the nature of mind is constantly changing. There's probably something in our mind that's looking for understanding, clarity, a way of living that's more helpful than the present one. And if our present life is pretty good, it's how to make it even more creative and brighter and more beautiful. And it's a bit of work, really. It's requires training ourselves to catch ourselves at those moments when we're going to do something that we know isn't going to be helpful to us, and ideally resisting doing it if we can. Sometimes we can't, we just have to do it. And then we just have to be aware that we're doing something that's probably going to cause problems, but that's what we've chosen. And we'll learn from that, etc. So, yeah, that's basically all I've got to say this morning. And there was a little ding then, and that's because my phone is still on. And that's because we had a little technical issue earlier, and I'm just making sure it's not going to ding anymore. And I'm just being honest with you, telling you what's happening. And hopefully you'll be grateful that I'm being authentic and honest with you, and we can all relax. I can relax knowing my phone's not going to ring anymore, hopefully. So we're going to do the same meditation we did yesterday, which is just an exploration of our kind of way we use our mind to see reality, if you like. It's actually, in a sense, it's quite a deep and powerful meditation, because, you know, we all think we've got this solid body that requires all sorts of things to keep it going, and a mind that needs all these inputs in one way or another to make us feel happy and so on. But the meditation is just a reflection on the fact that actually everything that we are isn't quite what it seems. And, you know, I think there's a book by a quite well-known quantum physicist who writes, it's called Reality Isn't What It Seems. And it's quite a good thing a little saying to have, you know, to remember that what you think is real isn't exactly 100% as real in the way that you think it is. That there is always, in like science, there's always room for error. Every single law has error within it. And so there's nothing perfect and ultimate, but this reflection on the human body as being made up of sort of elements is a kind of, or you could say it's like a template of looking at how we can reflect on most things in the world. So in any situation, we could break it down into its elemental parts and see what's sort of happening. And this will create sort of space. And it's just interesting reflecting on our body as being composed of a number of elements. And as I said yesterday, the Buddha in one of his teaching names 4 elements, but if you include the space you take up in the world, that your body is occupying space, that's another element. And the mind, which we all have, is the 6th element. We've got this richness of different elements within our body which we can just reflect on. So let's just prepare ourselves for a period of reflection, of letting go of meditation in a way is making life simple, isn't it? You sit still, you don't move, close your eyes, stop listening or seeing things. You might listen to me, keep it simple, but you know, let other sounds just pass you by. Ideally, let other thoughts pass you by, but that's not always easy. So meditation is the most obvious way of having simplicity in life. And a lot of people find, just to give, you know, just to kind of make more of simplicity, is that simplicity has this sort of sense of coming home, coming back to your sort of more essential nature, yourself, without doing things, without having to do anything. And it's where we, if we need it, we've given ourselves permission to do nothing. And the meditation perhaps is best seen as this a period of kind of deliberately giving space to do nothing. Completely useless, it's a sort of completely useless activity. And there's something wonderful about uselessness. Is in uselessness, there's so much beauty and ability to have aesthetic experiences of a deeper, more richer, more wonderful nature. So the uselessness of doing things, or the usefulness of doing things even, we just put on hold, and we just allow ourselves the simple life. We're sitting still, ideally sitting upright, sitting with a sense of being alert. And in this state of stillness, of simplicity, of not moving, we can allow ourselves to just turn our attention to what we're experiencing in our body. We can turn our attention to the experience of our body being kind of heavy, if that's heavy. I kind of mean heavy in a kind of physics sort of way rather than a psychological way. It's just, it weighs a lot. All our bodies have mass, and all our bodies are being pulled down, held down by gravity. And this allows us to experience the body as having this mass, this weight. And as we begin to experience the body in this way, we can reflect that one of the elements that we are made up of is, it has this label called earth, the earth element, which represents solidity. That's the principle. And it presents itself in the body structure. We all know that we have a skeleton. We all know we have bones. We can actually experience our bones, particularly we can experience our teeth. You might rub your tongue across your teeth, and you know that is solid. Your teeth are solid. The limbs of your body often feel solid. If you were to tap your head, I'm not suggesting you do it, but if you were to tap your head, you would know that there's a solid bone beneath the skin. We could just reflect on all that's solid in our body, the parts we can actually experience, like hair. If we got hair, comb our hair, fingernails, can feel the, you can often feel the sort of bone in the joints. And we can feel the weight of our body because it has a solid, or part of it has a solid mass. And although we know the body to be solid, it's also changing. The solidity is not just fixed, but it's constantly changing. And we know it's changing because we eat food, which is solid. We chew food, digest food, and we have the evacuation of solid particles that we don't want. So food we eat is what we become, kind of the particles of that get transferred into us. Other particles that make up the solidity flow away. So we're, like everything else, in a state of change. So in the meditation, you can allow yourself to feel solid and then reflect, actually, this solidity isn't as real as it seems because it's also changing. And then we can move on to the element that we call water, which is the label that represents all that's of a liquid nature within us. It's much easier to experience the flow of liquids, not really experience the flow of solids, but we can experience the flow of liquids. But we might like to reflect that our body, most of it's made up of liquids. Most of its weight, the weight of our body, is liquid. About 70% is water, in one form or another. Yet we think our body is so solid, but there's such a large proportion of our body that's liquid. And that liquid exists as tears, saliva, of course our blood, all the digestive juices, and the sweat that is part of the cooling mechanism for keeping our body temperature at the right temperature. And we drink in water, maybe in the form of just water, maybe in the form of tea, coffees, other substances. But we can't exist without taking in water. And of course, the liquid, it doesn't just keep filling up more and more. It remains about the same volume. So when we take in water, we also have to let go of the water in the form of urine. And this is us. We're drinking and allowing not only the solids but the liquids to flow out of us. And in this stillness, we may experience the saliva in our mouth, or even sometimes you can experience the fluid in your eyes, pulsing of the blood. And then next we can contemplate or reflect on the element that's labelled fire, which represents the heat in our body, the temperature of our body. We generate this heat from food we eat, mixing with oxygen in a form of combustion, just like you find in all other processes of fire. So we have internal heat generation. We have the heat from the world around us, when it's warm, when the sun's shining, when we're in buildings with heatings. And we also release heat when we're in situations where the air around us is cooler than our body. We even release heat if we're standing outside on a dark night to the universe. We're radiating heat all the time. We wear clothes to insulate us, to keep the heat in. the heat that we produce when it's cold. We have mechanisms for releasing the heat when it's too hot. And the whole process is extremely delicate. We need to maintain a core body temperature that's within very narrow limits. So there's constant adjustment. It's totally amazing. It's absolutely incredibly, I mean, it's something so wonderful about our body. And sometimes our bodies are not functioning fully, or create pain and illness. And even the sensation of things like pain, which can be like burning sensations, coldness, or flowing. Everything's in a state of flow. So there's a wave flowing through everything, a vibration. And then we move on to the element air, which represents all the gases within our body, the air which we know is around us. We can move with our hands, fan ourselves. We're moving through air all the time. And of course, we need to breathe in air. So we're always breathing in, breathing out, thousands of times a day, night. We never stop breathing. We're taking air from outside of us. It flows into us. We extract oxygen from it and breathe out the waste products of combustion, the carbon dioxide, the other gases we breathed in. And this solid form of me and my body is just like a whole factory of processes going on. constant breathing, transference of elements, production of heat from the air. So our being is made up of this element. And this element air, we can definitely feel the rhythm of it because we're breathing. We feel the inflow and outflow. And even if we're not focusing on that actual sensation, we know air is flowing in and flowing out all the time. We may feel it in the movement in our belly or back, chest. We can move on to the element space. This represents the space that our bodies occupy. As we grow from a small baby to a child to an adult, we occupy more and more space. And the space that we occupy is constantly changing shape. So it's kind of more subtle, this element, but it's something we can also experience. And we also know how important space is because we like to have our own space. Sometimes we mean that in a kind of maybe a psychological or mental way, but also it has its physical application, just wanting more room around us. So maybe the space of our body is extends a bit beyond the limits of the skin, the actual physical body. We want to have space to walk through, space to swing our arms in if we were swinging our arms, space to lie down in, to sit in. And the space we occupy is constantly changing. And then lastly, we have the element of consciousness, the most sort of subtle, in some ways the most interesting. And here it probably means, or we can experience it as the consciousness of our thoughts, consciousness of our emotions, the whole process of all the brain activity, the brain activity that creates a reality around us. When light comes in through our eyes and it stimulates little rods at the back of the eyes, releasing chemicals, signals, and then we have in our mind an image that we know is a tree or a house or another person. The consciousness that has a particular way, a habit of responding to coming into contact with objects. A consciousness that has a narrative or a story, if you like, about who we are, what we believe in, our views. And all these things all these aspects of consciousness, well, they make up things. They create an inner and outer world. Consciousness that tries to fix things down, ask questions, wants to know, wants to have answers that are kind of fixed and real. Consciousness that can create complexity. Consciousness that also can create simplicity or a lack of complexity. Consciousness that is constantly changing. There's nothing still or fixed about a conscious mind. We know this from just experiencing our thoughts. When we pay attention to what's going on. And perhaps there's this other conscious aspect of consciousness of something that is more pure, that's the consciousness that's able to observe, watch, so to speak, be aware of. All the mental events that are taking place in our mind. We don't really know where consciousness is or where it's located, or even if it has a location, somehow connected with the body, because it comes with a body, a live body. Mysterious, amazing. Maybe it's all around us. This is another aspect of consciousness. We can allow it to imagine, to not fix things too permanently, rigidly. And consciousness that can experience itself as changing, flowing. And there we are, we have a body made up of these 6 elements that we relate to as being a fixed thing, object, we're very attached to. We're scared of losing. But in reality, it's just a whole mass of processes flowing, moving, changing. And because it's not fixed, not rigid, we can make changes, at least to some extent. In the habit of being in a certain way. But we could just reflect for the last few moments that we have some authority or ability to make changes. Things aren't so fixed. that they have to be as they are, in a fixed sort of way. We can change. We can become something more. So your body is probably telling you you need to move it now. And it's one of the other things about bodies that actually seem to, if you can say a body's designed, the body has a need to move and be active. So it's good sitting still for a while, but we'll have a little stretch and move the body around. Stand up if you want to. So this is, we have a little while for any questions, or anyone want to share any experiences.
So there's a question from Ming that says, you said initially that we may need a longer gap of awareness between the resultant and karma until we become more experienced. How does this tally when we do become more experienced, as we become more in flow and time, slows down and elongates, so then it feels like we have more time to respond?
What was the last bit? We have more time to...
So I think it's saying that does time sort of slow down and elongate, so there's more time to respond when you become more experienced? I think that's the question.
Sorry, my mind usually throws up complexity with people answers to people's questions. I suppose that, if you think about time, you can think about it in different ways. You can think about time as clock time. That there's 1 minute, 1 second after another second after another second, and it's linear and it's kind of fixed. That's how we live our lives. But actually, our experience of time is much more flexible, isn't it? We can have an experience of being somewhere where maybe we're enjoying ourselves, and time seems to go very fast. We were doing something, and then suddenly it's gone. The time, and we thought it had only taken. We thought we'd been sitting here for hours or something. We realised it was just a short time. Or, very often we're doing something which we're not particularly interested in, or it's a bit boring, or it's like having to wait for a bus or a train to go. And we're sitting, and the time just seems to take even longer, doesn't it? It seems as though it stretches out. So when we talk about time, I suppose you have to kind of be clear what you mean. And maybe what we experience is that this gap, although we think of it as existing in time, maybe that time is more that kind of flexible time. So you learn, first of all, to create a kind of a gap in like fixed time. Like you might actually think, all right, I'm going to give myself a few seconds, or take a few breaths, which is a way of measuring time, if you like, before you act about something, which needs to be a considered action. So you kind of create that gap. But as you become familiar with functioning in this sort of way, you kind of the gap is there still, but maybe it just feels like it's much shorter and more spontaneous. So one of the dangers of talking about creating a gap with awareness and mindfulness is that you can become a bit kind of mechanized, like you're not going to move too quickly. You're just going to do things. And you can slightly alienate yourself from your emotions and how you feel. So it's quite complex in a way. It's easy to talk about creating a gap, but I think I think maybe in a way the gap is almost more of a metaphor. So it sort of exists, but it doesn't quite exist in the way you think it exists. And the metaphor really is for responding consciously to situations which require you to respond consciously to situations. So you have this ability, part of your brain will just automatically save you from danger. Like if something's going to hit you, you'll move out of the way as best you can. So that you don't need to worry about that. But when you're dealing with thoughts and emotions and things, knowing what you're actually feeling and what you're likely to do with those feelings is very helpful. So it's a kind of then a need to slow down and give yourself space in terms of time, allow something new maybe to emerge, how you're going to respond to a certain situation. So I think, I don't know if I'm really answering your question actually, but I'm just trying to perhaps give a different angle on looking at what we mean by time and a gap between things. So probably what I'm talking about more is learning how to respond creatively to situations than react instantly to situations which really require a more considered and more creative response. So I don't know if I answered the question fully, or maybe sometimes questions are complex, and yeah.
So there's a question from Lisa about it being more difficult to be mindful and to meditate with sort of menopausal hormones, and she was wondering if you've got any thoughts about how to work with that.
I'm probably not the right person to ask, actually. Maybe if you come back next month when Vidyamala's here, she could answer that much more fully. I don't, as far as I know, men don't have menopausal hormones, but certainly have hormones. What was can you just repeat the first part of the question? How do you work with them?
Yes, yeah. How do you work with that in meditation?
Well, I guess with anything really, it basically applies to anything that happens to us that we don't have much control, well, we have no control over, let's say. I guess with menopausal hormones, they're being released into your body, the hormones, and you don't have much control over them. You may have certain control by taking certain medications, or your behavior, how you behave in some sort of way, I don't know. But with anything that's where there's an automatic process going on, all you can do really is accept that that process is going on. And if it's unpleasant and you can't do anything about it, you, in a way, have to, without gritting your teeth and thinking, oh God, I've got to put up with this, but you think more in terms of, this is what's happening to me, how am I responding to that? And of course, if it's hurting, something's really hurting, and it's painful, it's confusing, it's creating sort of a cloudiness in your mind, and so on. The first thing to do really is to learn how to kind of accept it in a very kind of caring, loving sort of way. It's not like trying to push, got to get rid of these hormones. It's a bit like realizing you're a human being, and this is part of being human. It's unfortunate if it's causing problems, but that is part of life. We're all going to get pain at some point in our life, and there's not much we can do about that. But when we have it, and when we can't just remove it simply with medication or whatever, then we have to go through a process of learning how to, some kind of caring sort of way, accept it and then work with it in a sense. The more you resist things that are unpleasant and you're doing it, you learn to do it automatically. I don't want this, don't want this, don't want this. You end up with creating more extra pain and tension in doing that. And you're wanting this is nice, and I don't want this. You're just sitting there like strung out between, this is what's called stress actually. And a lot of people live with stress because we're trying to make something happen that's nice and push things away that are not nice. And to de-stress, you have to kind of learn to sit with an experience, so to speak. When I say sit with, I don't necessarily mean sitting there, maybe walking around. You're having to learn how to accept that at this moment, this is going on for you. So how do you respond to that in your mind? You may decide to distract yourself from it. You may think, oh, I've had enough of this. I'm going to do something I know that will stop me functioning in this way, and I can forget about it. But it will come back again, certainly with things like menopause. And, if you're I know women become very hot. Sometimes you get a hot flush with menopause. So you can do something about that to some degree. You can, if you can, cool down by having colder air coming around you. That's one thing you can have. But there will be things that you can't do much about. And the ongoing thing is usually, it runs for a period of time. And during that time, it's, learning how to have the best creative responses for this. Interestingly, Vidyamala's actually recorded a whole load of meditations for women with menopause. It's on an app. I can't remember the name of it, but she'll probably tell you about it next time it's needed. But for the rest of us who don't have menopause, it's the same process with any kind of painful, physical painful or mental painful experience, is learning how to accept it in a kindly, compassionate way, sort of treating yourself with kindness, realizing that's not nice, it's unpleasant. What can I do that's most creative with this situation? If you want to know more about it, probably Breathworks is the place to go. I want to advertise my organisation that I started up with Vidyamala, but that's the sort of thing that people are dealing with all the time, how to deal with painful bodies and painful situations.
So there's a question from Annie. You mentioned that a means of weaning ourselves off the sense of craving is to delight in more simple sense pleasures, such as hiking in nature and watching the sunset.
Yeah.
Is there not a danger that we begin to crave these experiences as well? Or is there something inherently different in the nature of these simpler experiences that prevents craving?
Yeah, in a way, there is something essentially different. They're usually more wholesome and they're less neurotic. A lot of our the cravings that we have for sensual pleasures, we're not careful. There's kind of neurosis comes about. We can't live without it. Whereas if you go out into nature, you can enjoy it and you can let go of it. You don't have to photograph it all and take it home with you. I mean, that would be that could become neurotic, that sort of thing. I've got to have this, and you're trying to hold on to it. But you just allow yourself to flow with the experience of the world around you, which is beautiful. Sometimes it's not beautiful, wars and famine and things like that. But in our normal everyday life, when we go outside, we look at a plant, we look at something that's living, it can create a pleasure within us that we allow ourselves to experience. Buddhism's never said don't experience pleasure, because what you would do then is just be in a constant state of pushing away anything. It'd be ridiculous. So it's kind of like trying to replace things that are potentially, I'm calling them neurotic. Maybe this isn't quite fully technically the term of neurosis, but it's where we just get into the habit. We have to have something, otherwise everything feels not right. And we're kind of just craving it. It's like, I think Maitreya Bandhu used the metaphor of flypaper. It's like where we have a craving for something, it's like a fly wants something and it gets stuck on it. So this thing that we're craving, we can't get off of. It's just sort of like stuck. Sometimes you can experience in relationships with people, they're very, very, you can have a very loving and caring relationship, but sometimes it can become quite sticky, but you can't be separated from the person that you're in relationship to. So what a meaning here is that there are pleasures that we can replace other central pleasures that are. It's just working out really which ones are going to be helpful for you and less sticky, so to speak, and enjoy the ones that are healthy and happy and available. And usually, there's also, through all the senses, we can have pleasurable experiences if we just take the time and energy to explore it more. I mean, just smelling, I enjoy the smell of fresh baked bread. And, that's kind of you can just sit and enjoy that smell, or the smell of a flower, a plant or something, or watching something grow, watching ripples on a pond, watching ducks, paddling around. All sorts of little pleasures in life, which actually, when you train yourself to experience them, and you realize actually all these pleasures are free, they're actually all available all around us all the time. You don't have to pay anything for them. And that means you don't have to work so hard to have pleasures in your life. You can simplify things, can't you? It's a sort of natural, simple process, really. And look, Roland's got a cat there. Look, he's taking great pleasure having a cat in front of him, and we're having pleasure, those of us that like cats, looking at his cat. So, you just sort of think, oh, that's lovely. So pleasure, such a pleasure that I'm having at this moment looking at Roland's cat, that it's free. He's not charging me for it. And I'm not going to go and get a cat, my own cat, just because that comes with a whole load of responsibilities and things like that. I'd much rather look at Roland's cat and enjoy that. So I'm not saying you shouldn't have cats, I just don't want extra responsibilities. Sometimes responsibilities are good, by the way, because they stop you being so focused on yourself. So there is a good case for having a cat. And we all have different choices. Okay, I think maybe we should leave it there, Nick. And I'd just like to, again, thank you all for coming. And just again, once more, ask you if you would like to do something really beautiful, and that is to be generous in supporting this project. And if you want to give some more money, make a donation if you haven't given anything. This whole project is free, but of course nothing's free in life. Someone's paying for it, and what's paying for it is people making donations, and they're providing Nick at the moment with an occupation, a very creative one, and it's providing the rest of us opportunities to share with people. But mostly it's providing an opportunity to contact more and more people, to help them, help those people that want to explore mind and feel this calling, this urge to understand, to work with, to become aware of, to develop themselves more and more. And so it's a very, very important project, and it's it's got all these win-win situations, really. I mean, the more people we can attract and help, the more people will benefit, the more people become aware of what they're doing, and if they behave in ways that are creative, the world will be a better place. That's one thing. The other thing is, if we have the opportunity to give, we change, we become bigger. And so, this is like many charities and things, they give you an opportunity for generosity. So when you give, the charity that runs all this gets the money to finance it and make it happen more. You feel better. Everyone's a winner. And so, if you can't afford very much, you can afford just a little. You can. If you wanted a figure, £50 is a good figure, because someone's worked it out. If we got £50 from enough people, it will pay for what we want to do. But the more money we have, the longer the project can continue, and hopefully it will continue way into the future. So there'll be an opportunity to click on a link and just transfer some numbers and feel that you're not just moving money around, but you're actually supporting something really worthwhile. Feel good about it. So it's almost half past 8, and here in the UK, and time for me to go. I won't be back again unless something happens. I'm not in the schedule, but I will be available. I will be coming to the retreat in August, and I'd love to meet some of you on that retreat. So I hope I'll see you then. And I do other things online sometimes, and I live near Adistana and on retreats here. So I hope I will meet some of you. But thank you so much for being here with me, and thank you for supporting me by being here. And it's been a real pleasure. So you can just unmute everyone now, Nick, and you can all say goodbye. And just to say,
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sona.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Go well. Go well.
Thank you so much. Have a great day,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye.